The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazines. If you want to learn the classics, if you want to learn how to classically paint a portrait, today is your day. Today we've got Ryan Brown and painting classical portraits.
Hi, I'm Ryan Brown, and today we're going to be doing a portrait from a live model. I'm thinking a lot about, in this video, about creating a standalone work that goes a little bit beyond strict portraiture. So the way we pose the model, the way we light her, what we're going to have her wear, how we're going to have her hair, color harmonies that we're looking for, those are all going to be pivotal things that allow us to try and create a standalone work of art beyond portraiture. We're doing this in front of a live audience today. This video is, the filming of this video is combined with a workshop, and so we have all our workshop participants here watching off to the side here, so I may be addressing them at some point as well, and you may hear a few noises in the background. It's coming from them. Before we bring the model in and get her set up, I'll go over some basic materials to get that out of the way. I'm using a New Wave handheld palette. It's a really comfortable palette. I could paint all day with this and not feel it on my wrist. And so I'll go over the colors. I'll name the brands and everything if you want to take notes. It's starting with Natural Pigments Lead White. I used Lead White number 2. Lead White number 1 is mixed with linseed oil. Lead White number 2 is mixed with walnut oil. And walnut oil is a little bit slower, drier. Which normally I like. On something like this, I'd actually probably want to use a little bit faster dryer. So I'm going to use a medium that will help with that. But one of the things I like about Lead White number 2 with the walnut oil is it's a little less yellow, and normally, like I said, I do like a little bit longer drying time. This is Lemon Ochre from Natural Pigments. It's a very subtle yellow ochre and really, really great for very light, subtle flesh tones. This is Blue Ridge Yellow Ochre from Natural Pigments, and it's a little bit richer, more saturated yellow ochre. A little bit leans slightly more to the red, which I like, and I'll use for the more saturated tones, or maybe even in the darks. This is Minium Red, which is also Natural Pigments. And I don't normally use this, but I have a redheaded model, and so it's a sort of a replacement for, say, like a Cad Orange, but except it's a little bit redder. And so I squoze some out specifically for the hair. This is Orange Molybdate, and also Natural Pigments. The reason I have that on my palette is because it's a very, very warm red, and more than any other warm red, like a cad red light would be maybe something you used instead. But the reason I like this better is because it retains its warmth far better when mixed with white, which is what I really want. This is Natural Pigments Genuine Vermilion. This is a pivotal color. It's really, really versatile and just sort of indispensable. I use that for all my flesh tones. This is Madder Lake, Natural Pigments Madder Lake. Something you could use instead of that would be, alizarin crimson, or Gamblin makes like a alizarin permanent, which is a nice color. So basically, this is sort of like an alizarin crimson, but Madder Lake. This is Sap Green from Gamblin. This is a very transparent, warm green, and I use it mostly for my darks, for my shadows. So I mix it with some of these reds, and it almost acts like a yellow, like yellow ochre might, but it's transparent. So if I add yellow ochre to my shadows, it's going to make them more opaque. And the sap grain allows me to retain a level of transparency and also add some feeling of warm yellow to the mixture. This is lazurite, which is lapis lazuli, is the genuine ultramarine blue, or the original ultramarine blue. It's a really, really beautiful color, very, very subtle blue, and I use that in my lighter flesh tones. In the darker flesh tones, it's a little too subtle. It doesn't have quite enough tinting strength, and so I use it mostly in the lights. This is, did I say that's a Natural Pigments brand as well? This is Old Holland, Ultramarine Blue Deep, and that color I use a little bit more. It's a really versatile color for me. I use it slightly in the darker tones of the flesh, but I also use it for a lot of my grays, combined with the Gamblin Asphaltum, which is a very warm, transparent brown. And combining that asphaltum with the ultramarine blue deep gives me a black that can either be completely black, or I can mix a little bit more blue and have it be cooler, a little bit more brown and make it warmer. And then mixed with white, I use it for most of my grays that I'm creating. Ultramarine Blue Deep, I use the Ultramarine Blue Deep because it leans just slightly more to the purple than regular ultramarine. Ultramarine Blue is just a tad green for me, so I like the Ultramarine Blue Deep a little bit better for that reason. And then I have some raw umber out, which I almost never use, but for the purposes of workshops and something where I have to work a little bit faster, I mix a little bit of that into some of my piles to help it dry a little bit faster. And this is Natural Pigments. Oh, I didn't say that the raw umber is a Gamblin. This is a Natural Pigments Italian varnish, and it's made of lead drying oil and wax and walnut oil and some turpentine. So the reason I squoze that out is just to speed up the drying time just a little bit. And then this is Oleo Res Gel. Normally I would use a walnut oil oleo gel. An oleo gel, all it is oil mixed with fumed silica, and the fumed silica is inert, so it doesn't have any effect on the painting whatsoever. It just helps the oil create a gel. So I can squeeze it out on my palette, and it's basically like having a palette cup attached where it's just oil. Normally that's what I use, but the Oleo Res Gel is a little bit faster dryer, so I have those two out, which I'll mix in a little bit to speed up the drying time. So those are the colors, that's the palette, and let's talk about brushes. I use a variety of brushes, and I'm pretty particular about the brushes I use and why. A couple different kinds. One that's probably, well, they're all pretty versatile, but one I use a lot for wet into wet is the Rosemary Series 279. They're a long flat brush, and they're mongoose hair, and they're really like one of the best brushes, the best brush I've ever used, especially for wet into wet, particularly because they hold a lot of paint, but they're also very, very soft. And so if I'm laying paint over paint, it'll tend not to cut through those bottom layers as much. And so I'll use these flats as well as filberts, mostly flats though. Because you can shape them as well. Once you get paint in them, you can kind of shape them to whatever you need. So I use those a lot. And unfortunately, you can't get real mongoose anymore. If any of you has family or like political friends in Hawaii, it's like the only place where you can get mongoose hair, but they won't sell it to you because they have a mongoose problem. They're overrun with mongoose, and so they don't want to create a demand for mongoose where people are going to start to breed them and then like exacerbate the problem. But if there's some way, because they trap them and they kill them because they're a menace, but if there's some way we could get a hold of those mongoose and get them to rosemary, we can start making these again. So maybe this video will reach somebody in Hawaii. The other thing I use is a rosemary, they're ivories, and I use the long filberts. These are really versatile brushes too. These are synthetic, and they're kind of midway between the softness of the mongoose and the stiffness of a bristle. So again, pretty good for wet into wet. They cut through the surface a little bit more than a mongoose would, but they hold a lot of paint. They hold their shape, and so they're really nice. Also, you can do a lot of wet into wet work with those. So I've got a couple of different sizes of that. Lastly, I use some Treacle hog bristle brushes, and again, I'm using a long filbert for that. And they're stiffer brush, but when you're working when you're working with more paint, and that's one of the benefits of using a bristle brush is it forces you to use a little bit more paint, and these bristle brushes really hold quite a bit of paint, and so they're really nice brushes. And Treacle is a really great company. They're all online, and so they don't have any stores, I don't think, so they keep the cost really low. So in terms of affordability and quality, you really can't beat Treacle for that. So those are the brushes. Those are typically all the brushes I use, and usually when I'm painting like for a demo or something, I always use pretty well brand new brushes because they're nicest when they're new, and I want as much control as possible if I'm like doing some circus performance like this. So so I use new brushes, and I keep the crappy old scrubby ones in the studio. And I usually just, once they start to wear down, I use them for backgrounds and things like that. I'm pretty spoiled that way. If you think you're worth it, just when it gets a little worn down, throw it out and buy a new one. And you'll never be rich because you'll always be spending money on brushes, but you'll always use nice brushes, and that makes for happy studio life. The last thing is I use, I don't know if you can see that on there, but I use a General's charcoal pure willow to draw with. The reason I use that is because it lays down really easily. if you can see this on the canvas. Lays down really easily, but it doesn't stain. I was using a different type of willow and doing these drawings on canvas, and it stained quite a bit. And then just at one of the Portrait Society conferences, I picked one of these up and just put a couple lines on my canvas, and it didn't leave a mark. It sticks pretty well when I need it to, but when I want to take it off and make a correction, it doesn't stain, and that's really convenient for me. So I've also got General's Charcoal Pure Willow. To go back to my colors real quickly, I'll just tell you a quick story. For years I tried to narrow down my colors for flesh tone. I really was on like a deep search to find colors that would more efficiently get me to a clean, pure flesh tone without as much mixing. Solomon J. Solomon, in his book, he talks about art students and kind of chastises them, saying they want these really beautiful, pure flesh tones, but they squeeze out these really garish colors. And in order to kill the intensity of the color, they have to mix and mix and mix. And so their flesh tones are always going to feel slightly muddy as a result of so much mixing. And I found that I was doing that because a lot of the colors I had were stuff that I was told to use maybe in college or something, and they're just really garish manufactured colors. So in my search, I started to narrow it down, and I felt like I was getting closer and closer. And then, years ago, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago at the Portrait Society, I was talking to George O'Hanlon of Natural Pigments, and they always bring all of their colors and they let you play with them in front of their booth so you can kind of mix them. And I was going to be doing a demo there, and so I went just to talk and play with colors, and I mixed genuine vermilion. It's the first time I'd seen genuine vermilion. I was using a vermilion that I thought was genuine, but it wasn't. And so when I saw his, the genuine vermilion, I was a little bit surprised. But I started mixing it with white, and it immediately felt like what I thought it should. The only way I can describe it is that it felt intuitive. The color felt intuitive. Like goes directly to colors that I feel like I'm seeing when I'm looking at a model. And you combine that with the lemon ochre, and the lemon ochre is far more subtle. And so these really light, airy flesh tones that I've been trying to get, it's almost a direct mixture to get there. And then he said, well, why don't you try this lazurite too? And again, like I'd never seen real ultramarine blue before, so I mixed that with white. And the only way I can describe it is it felt natural. It felt like a natural color, whereas the ultramarine blue feels like plastic. It feels like a manufactured color. Anyway, so I did this demo there using those 3 colors as the base, and it was the easiest. It was just so intuitive. The color mixing was so much easier. And afterwards, George sent me this pamphlet that he had translated from French, from like the 17th century, where they lay out the typical colors for flesh tone that everybody was supposed to use, and it was lead white, lemon ochre, vermilion, and lazurite. And I thought, if people knew this from like the 17th century, why did it take me like 8 years to hear about it? And so luckily, like, I stumbled on it, but that's become the base for my flesh tone ever since then. It's just 3 really integral colors that they just work. That's as simple as I can say it is. They work. The other thing to think about, and this is maybe a little too scientific, but with natural pigments, and I'm not talking about the brand, I'm talking about just pigments that come from the earth versus manufactured colors like ultramarine blue. The difference in particle size actually matters because it has a lot to do with light refraction. When you have a natural pigment, you're dealing with a lot of different particle sizes within those pigments, and the way that light pierces the oil paint and bounces around and comes back to your eye is more, it mimics more things that we would look at in nature, whether it be leaves or rocks or flesh, whatever, because light reacts in a similar way to those pigments in a refractive way as it does with flesh or other natural materials. When you have a manufactured color like an ultramarine blue, the particle sizes are much more similar. They're very uniform. And so when light bounces around it refracts in a similar way as it would with, say, a plastic toy or something. So it does actually have some visual effect in terms of how light reacts with our paintings. So using natural pigments, whether you're going to grind your own paint or buy it in a tube, I've noticed a subtle difference, and that's one particular reason why I would use a lot of these colors from natural pigments, because I know how they make them, and I even know where they get them from say Afghanistan or China or whatever. So that makes a difference to me. In terms of canvas, I am using a very, very fine portrait grade linen. It's really, really fine. I bought this raw from a place called A&E Art in Brooklyn, and I sized it and glued it to a birch panel with Biva film. Biva film is a heat-activated glue. It comes in a roll, and you just cut it to size and peel it off. And I use a hand iron and iron it down to the board, and then take the linen and iron it down. On the take the other side of the film off and glue the linen down, and then I use the Natural Pigments lead primer to prime it after that. So that's what this is, and it's really, really, really fine. Yeah, I think I'm going to work this size. This is a 20 by 24. Again, I haven't quite yet composed the model, but if I feel like I need to work a little bit smaller, I have this other piece of linen, and it's actually the same linen as this, except this came pre-primed from the store. And it's still lead primed, but I mounted that to a gator foam panel. So I didn't necessarily, I primed myself, this was pre-primed. This one you can see, it's got little white spots all over it. The reason for that is I was learning on this, and so with this, when I mount it on the panel, linen is inevitably going to have little knobs on it. So one of the steps in the process is I use a GAC 400, and that stiffens the linen. So before I lead prime it, I put a coat of GAC 400 on it. That's GAC-400. It's a golden product. And that stiffens the linen. Once that's dry, it only takes 10 minutes to dry, I take a little razor blade and I shave off all those little knobs so that I don't have random, especially with such a fine linen, those little knobs make a huge difference on the surface of a painting if you're going to keep the paint pretty thin. So I shave those off, and then I use a GAC 100 and that seals the linen. And then I have a really even surface. And then I do the lead priming, 2 coats of lead priming. With this one, this was a learning panel. So I glued it down, and then I realized there's all these little knobs, and so I had to shave them off on the front. And then it didn't take the sizing off the canvas, but it took a little, in spots, it took a little bit of the lead primer off, and so I just put a little lead primer over the top of that. Now I've learned with this pre-primed linen to turn it over on the back, shave those knobs off the back, and then I mount it, and it's perfect. But I didn't think of that on this first one. So this is a 16 by 20. I may choose to switch to that depending on how I'm going to compose the model. Before we bring the model in, I'd like to talk a little bit about concept development. I went back and forth with Allie, who organized this whole thing, and we were looking for models, and she sent me a lot of different options. And I'm pretty picky. If I'm gonna paint something, I really want to paint what I really want to paint. So I went through a lot of different models before we found one that had certain qualities that I'd like to look at and study and work out and paint. So when we found that model, I had a few of her photos, and I knew she was a redhead, I knew she had fair skin, and I knew she had fuller lips, and that's about where it ended. So what I did in the weeks prior to this is I just did a couple of imagined sketches to kind of think about pose and what I might want to paint conceptually. And in these sketches, I'm thinking more about sort of the abstract quality of the canvas. What if you were to see this from 25 yards away, and it was just in the small little thumbnail, I'm thinking about sort of dynamic design. What are the abstract shapes that the head, the hair make on the canvas, the separation of the larger masses, and the overall color harmonies. That's all I was really thinking about. So I'll just show, these are nothing special. I'm not showing them to say like, look at my pretty drawings. These are just concept ideas. You maybe just sort of jotted down 30 minutes, an hour to get an idea of what I might want to paint. And again, this is without really seeing the model. So it allows me to think about what I might do. And we probably won't do anything like that. Maybe we will, but this is sort of idea. The reason, the thought behind this, the hair, I wanted to frame the face pretty well. I'm thinking about lighting coming from above to create some interesting shadows here. And then having the shirt open just to create, with her flesh being so clean and even and fair, I thought it'd be really nice to have the head here, have a little shadow break there, and then be able to describe like a long element of that flesh kind of extending down. I'm thinking of her having a white shirt on in here as well, and playing the white shirt off of the fair flesh tone, and having those color harmonies kind of carry the painting, and having a lighter background, as you can see as well. So that was sort of idea behind that sketch. And then, sorry, briefly, just emotional content, again, to try to make a portrait that is a little bit more than a portrait. I'd love to capture some sort of living expression on her face that, although not specifically narrative, can suggest a type of narrative, so that when someone approaches the painting in a gallery setting, they can relate to it in a way that's beyond portraiture. So having some sort of emotional expression is pretty important for me. Here's another one. You're more of a profile, but also thinking a lot about just the general shape that's created. Thinking a little bit more about the hairstyle, because the composition of the hair is pretty important. And I mean, same basic idea, trying to play, I want the red hair to be a strong element in the painting and really frame her face. And to set off the colors in the flesh, I want a really light background. So I can be as subtle as I want in the flesh, and it's still going to feel very colorful. And then this one was thinking like pretty ambitiously, like let's add a hand to it. I'm probably not going to do that, but it's just another idea. Again, looking at hair shape, and this one's a little bit more static than I'll probably want to go, but still maybe a little bit pensive. I was thinking of something simple and somewhat pensive with that drawing. Color-wise, I couldn't do some preliminary studies of this model because she's in Texas and I'm in Utah. So I got a friend to sit for me who's a redhead, and I just did a quick sketch of her before I came out. I had her wear a white shirt, kind of went with that idea of having the flesh extend down in a really interesting shape. And I used similar lighting just to kind of think about color and color harmonies. And for me, color composition is a really important element of the painting. I want to create as much of a mood with how the colors play well together as I do with the emotional content of her face and the drawing, and I want everything to kind of work together to solidify the idea. So I did another sketch before this of a model who is pregnant. And although it's a completely different idea, the color harmonies in it are something that I thought really applied to what I wanted to do here. And so I brought this sketch as a sort of reminder of where I might want to go. I like a little bit that the background here is a little bit bluer. It plays off of the blue of her eyes. It kind of balances the red of her hair, whereas this is a little bit warmer. But I think these two combined are good color studies of how I might want to take the color harmony. And especially in this painting, I want that color composition to be very, very strong. So I'm going to work to create very simple, subtle flesh tones, very light background, and have the tones of the flesh, the tones of the shirt really play well with the tones of the background and create something really pleasing like that. So we've got our model Juliet in now, and we're going to find a final pose for her. And we showed the sketches, and that part of the process is something that is really important for me to visualize the kind of painting I want to do. I don't do a lot of commissioned portraits, not for any particular reason. I probably would do more, but I don't get asked a lot. But if I did, the commissioned portraits that I have done, I always want to think about making a portrait that goes beyond portraiture and is a standalone work of art. So when I'm just painting a model, it is about the model, but it's more about me and what I want to accomplish, and the kind of tone I want to set with my painting, the kind of presence I want it to have on the wall. So I'm thinking a lot about abstract design and emotional content when I'm making a painting like this. So when I'm posing her. Those are the things I'm thinking about. I've had her braid her hair to create a sort of pattern in the hair, and then I'll think about the mass and how that frames her face. And then the color harmonies we've already talked about. We've got a cool light, so in the background we'll have, like I showed already, we'll have a cool background, but it'll have elements of warmth that play off of her flesh tone as well, similar to this study I did before I got here. So you can see how something like this, even though it's a completely different model, painted last week in a completely different state, has so much to do with what we've got right now, and is a big help. So part of my process usually is the use of photography, not necessarily for drawing purposes or for painting in the studio, because we're going to be doing this all from life. But normally what I would do in my process is I'd bring a model in that I really want to paint. I would have all of my Imagine studies done, so I had an idea of pose and mood, color content, those sorts of things. And I bring the model in, and I kind of let that inform where I want to go. So just as she's sat here for the last 5 minutes, I'm paying attention to how she tilts her head, the direction that she moves her head, and taking some sort of natural cues from her, and trying to figure out what I respond to. I really like that, or she tilted her head up for a second, or she looked off to the right for a second, and I look at all those things and I think that's nice, oh that's nice, and what do I want to paint? So I'll go through that series and I'll photograph 300 or 400 different options. I'll think, do I want the hand in, do I not want the hand in? I might slightly alter the hair a little bit. I might change, because when you're painting a model that is draped, you want to consider the composition of the drapery, so you're not just painting what's there. So those are all things that I consider, and I'll photograph that. I'll have a model in for maybe an hour or two and go through all of these ideas to develop them. I'll take those home and over the next week go over them and over them and over them. And this is where photography is really useful for me, because it gives me time to allow the idea to mature, even if it's just a pretty straightforward portrait. I want to get as clean of a pose and idea on the canvas as possible. And something I talked a little bit about in the last video I did, which was painting the figure in the landscape, that when you paint strictly from life, you're forced to settle for the average of the model. So you're taking, it's one of the benefits, but it's also one of the restrictions. So one of the benefits from painting from life is you have a mountain of information to utilize. The other benefit is that she does change, she does move, so you get a sense of movement, of volume, of a better understanding of spatial qualities, of construction, anatomy, accurate color. All of those things are really beneficial from life. But one thing you don't get is the pausing of time to contemplate exactly what you want in terms of pose, exactly what you want to accomplish in terms of emotional quality, or overall basic composition, really abstract design and composition. And to make those decisions on the fly can often be more of an immediate reaction than a conscious purpose. And when I'm making a painting that I assume is going to hang on a collector's wall, I want as much of it to be conscious purpose as possible. So for me, the use of photography within that process is pretty important. Even if I'm going to do the entire thing from life, I want those moments of pause to contemplate why I'm making this painting. So, so I've done that to some degree in the imaginative process, and now as she's up here, I'm going to have to come to a decision on exactly what I want. So I'll have you, yeah, just sit back like that. Turn your head to your right a little bit more. Tilt to your right. Yeah. It's much easier. It's much easier to just do a very straightforward portrait, and I always make the dumb decision in workshops where there's super limited time of like turning the head on all three axes and making it like incredibly difficult for myself to get the drawing, but I can't help it. Just it's prettier. Okay, to your right a little bit more, and chin up. Yeah, I really like that. So one of the things I really like about that in terms of design is with her chin up a little bit and that slight tilt, I'm getting a little bit more shape of the shadow right there. It also reveals a little bit more light on the sternocleidomastoid there. And you know, one of the reasons I want the shirt to be you know, done to about here is to open up the light right there in the flesh, so I can play this large mass of light against the white of the shirt. And then all of this, you know, with the background as well is going to harmonize. So the punch of the painting is going to be this large mass of the hair and how that frames her face, and the interesting shape made by the braids. And then the focus is going to naturally be the punch of all of the features. The red of her lips is going to play off of the red of her hair, the red in her cheeks, and then the blue of her eyes is also going to be, it's really going to stand out and play off some of the blues in the background and the hair. Background and shirt is what I meant. So what I'm thinking with that angle of the head and the hair coming down like this, it really puts a frame on that side of the face that pulls it forward from the background. If you turn your head to your right just a little bit more. Then we're starting to lose that. And you don't mind the background to the face because the subtle color in the flesh is going to separate it. But if you come back to your left just a little bit more. That brings this hair back and adds this really beautiful sweep. It's really simple, but that one sweep of the hair is going to play off of the complexity of the contour of the face. And from a design standpoint, I really like that. It also creates kind of a really beautiful triangle that just goes up from there and down through there, and just makes a really simple, nice geometric shape that contains all of the focal areas into the portrait. So that's kind of what I want, just a tiny bit to your left. Now I'm just seeing how much of that far eye do I want to try and explain. How much of that back cheek do I want to reveal? Come to your left just a little bit more, a tiny bit more. Okay, I'm seeing all these different, slightly different positions to see which one I like. The more I bring her towards me, the more I feel like I have to, I don't know, maybe it's a little abstract, but the more I have to know who she is. And I'd rather relate to her on a more personal level based on people that I know in my life. And I'm talking about like the final painting. If I were to a collector coming in, I want to be able to see the painting and obviously recognize it's a person, but I'd rather see it as more of a generic figure in terms of it allowing me to connect with it more personally. And if I have to address her specifically and think about her as the sitter, and wonder who she is, then it's a little less personal to me as a collector. Is this making sense? I'm not talking about the saleability of the painting, because that's not really important to me. It's more about being able to have a viewer, so I shouldn't say collector, just a viewer. You don't have to buy it to appreciate it. I'm saying the viewer, I want them to be able to connect with the person without them having to wonder exactly who they are, where they're from, and do you know what I'm saying? This is not a painting about the story of the sitter, where maybe a portrait of my daughter would be. I want you to know this is my daughter. But a portrait of a model that I'm just hiring for because she's really beautiful, and the color of her hair and these color harmonies that I want to create. Now I'm thinking of more of just the painting aspect. It's not as much about the sitter as it is about the final painting. And so if I pull her to the left like that, I feel like I have to confront her as a person a little bit more. If you turn to the right, back to the right a little bit, back to the right a little bit more, and tilt your head to the right slightly. Bring your chin down a little bit more. Yeah. And now I feel like it's less about her in a way, and more about the abstraction of design. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but to me, it becomes more of a painting about design and general beauty rather than specific model type. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this. This is really actually very similar to what I had in my mind. Last night I spent actually quite a bit of time thinking about this, and I was looking at my drawings that I showed previously, these imagined drawings, and really trying to think about exactly what I want to do today. I really enjoy painting from life. I really enjoy painting from models and making paintings, but there's a big difference in my approach to making a study from a model and making a painting from a model. It's like plein air painting and studio painting for me. If I'm doing a study from life, say in the woods or out in a pasture or whatever, plein air painting for me is not about making a product, it's about learning. And I take all the pressure of trying to make something amazing to show people and share in a gallery. I take that completely out of the equation, and it's a much more comfortable experience for me. It's just, it allows me to just sit down and learn something. And when I'm painting from a model just for the sake of learning, then a lot of these little design elements and concept development doesn't come into it. I'll get somebody in, and it almost doesn't matter who they are. I just want to learn something. With this, I want it to be a little bit more than that. I'm not trying to make a head study. I'm trying to make a painting. I want to make as beautifully designed a painting as I can. And so that's where all of the preliminary thought and design comes into it. So as I'm looking at her, I'm thinking painting, not study. And there's a big difference for me. All right. So now I'm going to make a final decision on my canvas too. I brought a little bit larger one. I could always cut it down if I need to, but how I place this on my canvas is pretty important. Okay. So from these first few lines, I can get a pretty good idea of whether or not that's a good placement. In working on a larger canvas, I tend to like to work a little bit bigger. This is only 9 by 12, and that's a little uncomfortable for me. I like to look a little bit more into each area of the face, and when I get too small like that, I feel like I'm a little too compressed, and I don't have the area, the space to research, I guess, to really get in and define things in any given area. So I like to work a little bit bigger, but this will allow me to work life size if I want to. I'm not doing site size, I'm just doing relative here, but try to get this placed properly. I want to make sure the mass of the hair is the thing that's going to spatially be really important in terms of compositional placement. So I also have to think if she's looking that way, I may want a little bit more space over here than I do back here. Also, the light is coming from the left to the right, so background-wise, it's probably going to, in terms of value, be a little bit lighter here, a little bit darker here. And you can catch just the hint of a shadow that she's casting on the background. I'm not necessarily going to put that cast shadow in, but I do want to vary it slightly, kind of in a similar way as this is varied. From top to bottom, I would do something similar like that. And so the back of her hair is going to unify slightly with the background, which will tend to close off that space. It'll tend to kind of melt together. So if I put her head too far back, it's really going to yank the whole thing off that side of the page. So typically, I want a little bit more space in the direction that she's looking, but I don't want to offset it so much because of that value issue. I think that's probably just a little too far to the left. So I'll move that over. Also think about vertically how much of this into the chest do I want to see. I want that to be opened up again for that strong value and color from here all the way through here. And I don't want that to run down off the page. I'd like that to be somewhat contained. So the overall angle of her, I have to consider then as well. The end of this is pretty well vertically in line with the side of the face. So that's something I'll consider too. I push it up just a tiny bit. Drawing is pivotal. So drawing is really pivotal, and I got a chance to watch a little bit of the Daniel Graves video and Cesar Santos video, and they both mention that as well. And so I'll just reiterate that the drawing is really key to good portrait figure work. When you're painting a landscape, you're painting a rock. I mean, it's good to know structure and space and how to define weight and texture, and all of those things are pretty important, but there's a lot of leeway in painting rocks and trees that you don't have when painting a figure. You really have to get the drawing right. And that means everything from anatomy to shape making, character. Drawing is really pivotal. That brings me to a good point. Let's see if I can make it while I'm drawing. Let's see if I can talk and draw at the same time. And that is education. I talked a little bit about this in my painting the figure in the landscape video, but I think one of the most important things, one of the most important decisions an artist will make in their lives is how they study. I mean, beyond like who you marry, how you study is really, really important, because the information required to become a great artist is as complex and necessary as the information you need to become a great lawyer or a great doctor. And I think it's a little bit more common in our culture today for artists to wear it's almost like a badge of honor that they were self-taught. And although there's going to inevitably be things that you're going to have to pick up on your own, the key elements of drawing and painting, in order to understand them to a much, much greater depth, I believe it's very important for you to learn them from someone who themselves was taught. And so, it's just like learning calculus or science, biology, whatever. You could go to the library and get a book on calculus, but you're not going to know addition, subtraction, multiplication, algebra, all of the preliminaries to calculus. And I think that's the way art education is a lot of times. We want to make paintings, we want to do really complex things, and we skip addition. And that's what drawing and painting training is come back to your left just a tiny bit. A little bit. Yeah, okay, and then just a slight tilt. Yeah. And everybody has a different lot in life. Everybody has their own situation. But the one thing you have to think about is, or one thing I tell students all over is to be fair with yourself. And it just sounds maybe too simplistic, but it takes what it takes. Learning how to do something well takes what it takes. It's a long process and a difficult one. And you don't get to shortchange that. You don't get to speed that up just because you want it to be sped up. It takes what it takes. And if you're fair with yourself and say, here's where I'm at and here's where I want to be, say, this is my ultimate goal, then you can't let anything get in the way of that. It's a matter of prioritizing and saying, this is the most important thing for me. And for every artist, being a master, being the greatest artist in the world is not that important, and that's okay. But for those of you that say, I want to be as brilliant as I can possibly be, there's no other way to do it other than through hard work. If you consider like Sargent, right? Sargent was perhaps the most naturally gifted painter in history, maybe along with, say, Rembrandt or Velázquez, or you could name a few others. But if anyone was born to do something, Sargent was born to paint. Michael Jordan was born to play basketball. But consider this for a second. Sargent, as good as he was, even at 13, 14, 15, needed to study in Paris. And Paris at the time was the absolute pinnacle of art education in the history of the world. The most condensed, concentrated, highest number of people studying and teaching art being done at the highest level in the history of the world, all contained in Paris. And imagine the environment of that. And here comes Sargent at 18 years old, hugely naturally gifted, to a degree we can't even fathom, total natural ability. And he studies in Paris, the greatest educational system the world has ever given us, for 6 years. And if he had to do that to become Sargent, then what's required of us? Just think about that. And then be fair with yourself and say, what do I need to do in order to really become a more perfect version of what I want to be? and then don't make any excuses. Just go for it. So all of that being said, drawing is really pivotal, and I am going to shut up and try to concentrate on that now. At the moment, I'm just getting a couple marks on the page that I'll then check. I'm just kind of eyeing it for now, and then I'll take a couple key measurements. But I want something down to not too specific. Just trying to get the basic idea of placement, proportion, the general gesture. And then I will I'll come back and take a couple of measurements here in a second. One of the main drawing lessons that I can share is it's kind of a lesson in priorities. I think I heard this at church once. I can't even remember, but I think I heard it at church. But a teacher gives his students a test, and he puts a jar on a table, and a pile of big rocks, a pile of pebbles, and a pile of sand, and then the test is to fit everything into the jar. And the only way you can do it is by fitting the big things in first, letting the pebbles settle into that, and then letting the sand settle into that. Any other option won't work. Not everything will fit in. And that's kind of the priority lesson you want to think about when drawing is the big things need to be taken care of first, and the small elements will fit into it later. It's a natural tendency for most of us to want to look to see very specific elements, detail-oriented. We want to see all the little things. We'll start drawing an eye too early. But you want to discipline your mind to take care of these larger shapes first, and get all of the basic elements of proportion and placement captured before you start getting into anything too specific. And it trains you also to see things more globally. Our natural tendency is to see things in an extremely focused way, to the exclusion of everything else. So if I'm thinking about the eye, I'm only thinking about the eye. And then when I get to the cheek, I only think about the cheek. And then when I really step back, I may realize that those things don't play well together. And so it's part of visual training to mentally step back from the subject, and in order to consider everything at once. In the end, it's the balance of the entire canvas that matters, and not individual elements of the canvas. So it's our job to sort of learn how to choreograph all of the information into one harmonious whole. A lot of times I'll just do this with paint and a brush. But I really want to get this and be a little bit more sure about the drawing before I jump into paint. So I'm going to be a little bit more careful with this drawing. I'm back and forth between doing preliminary drawings and just drawing with paint. And I like both methods. Drawing with paint allows me to be a little bit freer and a little bit more sculptural with how I mush the paint around, and I find but I find the drawing a little bit slower, so it may be well into the process before things get really locked in. For the purposes of this, I think it's a little bit more important to lock the drawing in sooner and then concentrate on paint application. Okay, so let me just think about placement real quick, and then I'll take a couple of quick measurements. I feel like I'm, with the position of this, that puts the hair here. I'm a little worried I might have come too far back. I'm a little over life size too, so I think I'm going to shrink that a bit, and that might pull that in slightly. So. I think I'm going to shift it forward just a little bit. That's easy to do. That's another benefit of keeping it simple is before you get too far into it, you can make these major decisions and it doesn't take long to shift. So you're only changing a few lines. Okay, so I want to lower. I want to kind of make it just a little bit smaller. So I'm going to just take 2 measurements. With that tilt, normally, maybe you guys already know this, but this might be a little overly simplistic, but I'll do it anyway. From the front of a head, typically, the brow ridge is halfway down, and then from there the nose is another half, and then from there the mouth is about 1/3, and then from the front, the center of the eye comes down to the corner of the mouth, center of this eye, corner of the mouth. In terms of measurement, that's a pretty general rule. And then from the side, from the center of the eye to the bottom of the chin is the same distance from the center of the eye to the back of the ear. You may already know that. But in this case, and the reason I say that is because she's tilted. And so I can't just put a line in the center and say there's the eye. This eye is lifted up quite a bit, and I don't see a lot of this eye. I don't really see the ear. So the things that I may use normally for reference to create these relationships aren't there. Okay, so I'm just going to take a measurement of the whole, and I'm holding my arm steady, and you could use any tool you wanted for this. Some people use like a knitting needle. You could use your brush, into your brush, whatever. I'm just using this charcoal stick and looking at a couple of things. As I step back from this, I'm a little concerned about how much space I'm going to have down here for the neck and the upper chest. And I just don't want it to feel like it's falling off the page. So I'm going to go from the top of the head to the chin and down from the chin and see. That puts it about there. I always want to extend that like lengthen that for some reason. But it really only goes up to about there, so I think that'll be good. I'm not comfortable with the head yet. I don't have enough information there to justify exactly the character of the main shapes yet. So earlier when we took a break, I called George at Natural Pigments, and because I'm a little concerned about the drying time of my paint, and I realized I made just a really dumb mistake. The difference in drying time between lead white number 1, which is mixed with linseed oil, and lead white number 2, which is mixed with walnut oil, is more significant than I thought it was. And lead white number 2 is going to dry much slower. And that's what I typically use in my studio because I'm not as concerned about time. And George said, if you want it to dry fast, just use lead white number 1. And I didn't bring any. So that's going to force me to use some of these mediums. And so when I was explaining my paints, I had what was an Italian varnish right here. And he said use the Venetian medium, that'll help it dry a little bit faster. So I took the Italian varnish off and I replaced it with a Venetian medium, which I could have explained later when I start painting, but I was just thinking about it, so. Okay. So now I'm just going to get basic height to width. And it's almost perfectly square, so I've got that about right. Okay, chin down just a little bit. One of the reasons I often paint or draw with paint is because it's faster. I can work a little bit more in mass, and when I'm drawing, with it being more linear, it tends to evolve just a little bit slower. Almost always when I'm doing preliminary drawing like this, I just get so irritated at how slow it is. I put it down and start painting. I'm going to try to not do that. I'm just going to try to resolve the drawing a little bit more. Here. I'm looking at major shapes and their relationships to each other when I'm putting these marks down. Again, I'm trying not to be too specific. Just everything is just a mark. It's just an indication of where these elements go. And that allows me to concentrate a little bit more on just specific angles and relationships. So this angle relates to this angle. And I can judge those angles off of each other. And that's also playing off my developed understanding of a perfect vertical and perfect horizontal. So I can say, you know, some people use like the hands on a clock, that sort of concept, and they say, well, it's about 2 o'clock, 2:15 or whatever. I don't necessarily think about it. Mine's a little more abstract. I just think it tilts about like that. And then I can look at relative, like for me, this angle on the eye right here is very, very similar and almost parallel to this angle here. And if I look for those parallels in nature, they exist. And it allows me to say, what's the distance between these two? If I look at the way the hair comes down right here, is very, very similar to the way this comes down right here. Not only does it exist in nature, but I can push those things so that these linear relationships are part of the abstract design. And they help carry the overall weight of the design. So the way I explain drawing, I'm sorry I keep interrupting my drawing, so it's going to take even longer, but the way I explain drawing is kind of broken down into 3 stages and 6 elements. The first stage is placement, proportion, and gesture. In the beginning, we might talk about proportion as relative size, and we might talk about gesture as angles. You know, the gesture of this is going to be contained in these angles that I initially put down. The second stage of development is shape, and the third stage of development is value and edge. So obviously the placement of our gesture angles, if they're correct relative to each other, is going to create, as a byproduct, a proper proportion. But we're not thinking about shape. I'm not thinking about closing this shape off necessarily yet as a shape. I'm thinking about just the relationships of where my angles are placed. And if I get that right, the shape is going to evolve out of that. So by the time mentally I shift over to correcting shapes, they're already like 80% done, but I haven't thought of them yet as shapes. And then the development of my shapes will start to include mass, which is the separation of light and dark initially. And that will have something to do with value, but it won't, mentally, I'm not thinking about value, I'm thinking more about how it affects the shape. And by the time I switch my thinking and I'm really thinking about the pivotal aspects of value and edge are already pretty well developed. But I wouldn't think about shape before these things were done. And I certainly wouldn't think about that before that was done. So it's just a natural progression in drawing.
With all of the abstraction we see in the modern art world, it can sometimes seem like representational painting is a lost art. In fact, just a few years ago, it was almost impossible to find a place to learn how to do the classics. One artist wasn't satisfied with his art education. He had the feeling there was more to portraiture than what was being taught in art schools around the country. So he headed for Florence to learn from masters, old and new. Then, after he studied and developed a lot of experience to become a master himself, he started his own school. And now, he's brought that knowledge back to you in his brand new course, Painting Classic Portraits with Brian S. Brown. But don't be fooled. This isn't just another instructional painting video. It's a full 5-day workshop on video. And it's the first and only time we've filmed an entire live workshop. In fact, a live audience of about 15 people paid over $600 each to attend this workshop. We filmed several hours each day, and after editing, This extensive video covers 14 hours of instruction on 4 discs. Inside this workshop on film, you'll learn the important foundational techniques of portraiture, which allow you to paint a beautiful portrait step by step in a clear and easy way. But not just any portrait, a portrait using the techniques of the old masters, where you end up with a highly finished, museum-quality painting. You'll learn Ryan's unique way to prepare one of the most paintable canvas surfaces you've ever learned, plus how to pose and draw your model, create precise and balanced compositions. Ryan also reveals his newly rediscovered technique for mixing fleshy tones from previously lost pigments, a lost art that Italian masters used centuries ago. And perhaps most importantly, he'll teach you how to prepare your concept for your portrait, an essential but often overlooked part of creating beautiful paintings.
But there's a big difference in my approach to making a study from a model and making a painting from a model. I'm not trying to make a head study. I'm trying to make a painting. I want to make as beautifully designed a painting as I can. And so that's where all of the preliminary thought and design comes into it. So as I'm looking at her, I'm thinking painting, not study. And there's a big difference for me.
This workshop on film is for the artist who craves to study under a master, but can't take the time or make the trip to Europe. It's for the artist who wants to do impressive, highly finished museum-quality paintings. And you don't have to spend the $600 like others had to pay to attend, plus their travel, lodging, and meals. You can take this workshop in your home, on your own time, painting along until you too have mastered the art of classic Renaissance-style painting with contemporary sensibilities. Painting Classic Portraits with Ryan S. Brown is available on DVD and downloadable video.
Well, that was Ryan S. Brown and Painting Classical Portraits. You can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com, and there is a discount code in the comments section. Now let's get right to our interview with Ryan Brown. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazines. And today I'm happy to have Ryan Brown with us. Ryan is the director and founder of the Center for Academic Study in Naturalist Painting. That's a mouthful. Did I get it right?
You got it right.
Okay, that's in Springville, Utah, which is a suburb of Salt Lake City and Provo. It's a wonderful little town. I've been there. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite all-time Mexican restaurants is right across from the Springville Art Museum, which is a jewel in the middle of what used to be nowhere. It's probably very busy around there now.
It's grown up a little. Our studio is just 2 blocks from the museum, so it's nice to have that resource close.
So are you originally from Springville, or how did you end up having your school there?
No, I'm from Salt Lake. I grew up in Salt Lake and then went to BYU, which is in Provo. And after that, went to the Florence Academy.
So did you go to the BYU Art School?
I studied illustration for a couple of reasons. Number one, I didn't know anything about art.
Right.
Growing up, nobody around me did anything artistic. And so studying something that had more of a commercial connotation to it seemed maybe a little bit more legitimate as a responsible decision. And then lucky enough because the studio side was completely modern, and even though I didn't know anything about art, I knew at least that what I wanted to do was something that looked like something, right? I wanted to do something representational. It was the only thing that really made any relevant sense to me. So the illustration side at least had some tie to the illustration tradition, which is Howard Pyle and Dean Cornwell and J.C. Leyendecker.
Well, and it has a great reputation. The BYU Illustration School has a great reputation.
Yeah.
And they've got a nice collection there at the
They
school.
have a really amazing collection at the museum. And so that was, it was good for me. I was lucky because at least I was doing figure drawing and head painting and those sorts of things. About my junior year, I think, I realized I didn't want to do illustration. I'm not interested in doing book covers or Time magazine or whatever, but they had an exhibition of Bert Silverman's work, and it was the first time. Again, I'm coming as a blank slate. I don't know anything about how not only how you paint, but why you would paint or who cares. I went through the Bert Silverman show, and for the first time felt like I was seeing somebody that was just doing what they wanted to do and making me really care about it. I completely fell in love with Bert Silverman's work immediately walking through that show, and thought, if he can paint whatever he wants and make me care this deeply, maybe I could do that too. And so that's when I really started thinking I'd like to be a fine artist rather than an illustrator.
Did you get a chance to meet Bert? Was he there for the opening?
Yeah, I met him there. He spoke, did a little demonstration, and I've met him a number of times since. And I still can't add him on Facebook. I still don't know him well enough where he'll add me on Facebook.
Well, you'll just get his political rants anyway, so.
I've been to a studio. We went as a BYU group later on to a studio. And so I've had a number of chances to really talk to him, but still not Facebook friends.
He's a good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a legend in one of the greats that of our time, of our generation.
Yeah. For me, as I have gotten older and older in the profession, I still come back to him. To me, he's not only one of my original sources of inspiration, but he's more of a reactionary painter to me than a lot of others.
What does that mean?
To me, he doesn't seem to have a formula of painting. He seems to have ideas and subjects that he wants to pursue, but when he starts to paint it, he allows the subject to dictate to a degree how it's painted, how it's handled. Whereas, I see a lot of other painters that they say, this is how I paint a figure, this is how I paint a portrait, and it's kind of a same sort of
process.
Yeah, process that is maybe a little bit less reactive to the particular subject, and I want that in my work. If I'm painting a young girl or my daughter, I want to handle her in a far more sensitive way than if I'm painting my dad, who's older and more wrinkly and just harder, So, or a landscape, or I want to be able to really distinctly treat subjects in the way that they demand, and I see Bert Silverman doing that quite a bit.
He's been painting for so long. It's beyond instinct for him. I had the privilege of being painted by Bert.
Yeah.
And whenever I'm painted, when I'm painted for the portraits at the magazine, I always ask that, number one, we do them live, because I'm a believer in live portraiture and not photographic portraiture. Number two is I always like to have a mirror set up behind them so I can watch where my eyes are going, so I can watch what they're painting.
Yeah.
And he had a likeness of me in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I was completely blown away. Usually likeness comes after a couple of hours with most painters, and he just went like this,
Yeah.
and boom, likeness was there. And then from that point forward, he filled it out. But that, Bert is probably in his 80s,
Yeah.
and so he's probably been painting for 60 years. I guess that's what 60 years experience will do for you.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty phenomenal watching him work. He's such a brilliant draftsman, and yeah, it's his sense of color and I mean, it sort of defies, which is uncommon for someone of his age that came up in a time where painting the way he paints is just not okay. And he sort of defies any sort of time or style or, it just doesn't look like he learned how to paint in the 60s or 70s. He just like great music, it doesn't matter. You don't know when it was written. It's just a great song.
Timeless.
Yeah,
Timeless.
and a lot of work from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they look like that. There's a certain coloration or a certain sort of style to it that is very in that moment.
Kind of like Instagram photos, right?
Yeah.
That have the color, the discoloration of the
Right,
photograph,
right.
which is much like what we got in the in the early stages of,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
my childhood. So you discovered Bert. You're in school. What happened next?
I just felt like I wasn't getting any better, but that was more of an underlying nagging, more than a really conscious thing, and because again I was coming from a really naive standpoint, so I don't know that I could have even defined what better meant,
Right.
And so I had a friend, fortunately, that had gone to a summer program at the Florence Academy, and so he started telling me about the Academy and showed me online. This was in 2000, probably end of 2001, 2002. So they had a very basic website, and I looked at the stuff, and I thought it was good, but again, I guess I felt like back then I was looking through everything with a thick fog. I thought it was good, but probably really more I thought it was better than what we were doing because he told me it was better than what we were doing, I really didn't see it.
I can totally relate to that, by the way.
Yeah.
Because when I first took my first art lesson, the guy said, well, just slap some paint on the canvas and express yourself. And I tried it, and it was like, but can't you teach me how to paint that bottle? And I couldn't even articulate what a still life was because I didn't even know what a still life was. I didn't know the terminology. And of course he said, oh, that's passé, you don't want to do that.
Right.
But at that stage, and I think we forget sometimes now that we're at a different level, I think we forget that there are people who are watching this who are at that stage who don't know the names of the colors,
Yeah.
don't know the types of art, don't know what's out there. I think one of the big problems we have today is that even though we have this huge movement of ateliers like yours who are teaching people how to do academic drawing, painting, etc., there are thousands and tens of thousands of art students out there who would crave that don't even know it exists.
Right.
Because they don't know what Google terms to search for.
Sure. And even when they see it, they don't know the difference. And I think that's a really important thing to understand for anybody watching. Or it's a really important conversation I have all the time because running a school, we're just down the road from two major universities. And so we do get a lot of students coming in, and so I have this initial conversation with everybody because for me it's maybe one of the most important discussions and conversations any art student can have initially in their development. And that is that you have to understand two things. One, that there's no visual training anywhere for anyone ever. It doesn't exist from K through 12, where we don't have any sort of system that teaches you how to use your eyes in the same way as we learn the language, we learn English or whatever, we learn sentence structure and we learn how to spell and progress through writing sentences and on and on. We don't have that in understanding how to train our mind to use our eyes. So what happens is we develop a functional sense of vision, which really just has to do with not falling down stairs and driving and not being a close talker or something. It's functional. And artists have to have a far better trained sense of vision because we're trying to communicate in that language. And that's a really particular training that is required to understand how to do that. And it doesn't exist. So
that's not something that just comes to you once you start studying nature, looking at light, painting outdoors, painting from life. Don't you think that a lot of that just occurs naturally? Or are you saying that it has to go beyond that?
I think if you want to be great at something, you have to study it very, very deeply and not on your own, which, is not a very pleasing idea in the current art world. A lot of people want to wear the badge of self-taught as it's like a trophy they hang on their wall. But if you consider any other discipline like math or science, or would you ever take your kid to a self-taught doctor, or have yourself defended by a self-taught lawyer? There's so many complexities to drawing and painting that I really think if you want to be great at the thing, you have to get training from somebody else who's great, and not. I think there's a tradition to it. There's an evolution of thought throughout the history of art that shows the development of thought from the Greeks through the Renaissance through the 19th century. And so there is information out there, and I think observation is part of it for sure, but it's not something that people that are just observing are sort of trying to reinvent the information. They're trying to rediscover the information on their own, and that's it's like trying to figure out calculus for the first time without just going to somebody who knows it and allowing them to kind of walk you through it. So I think drawing and painting is very similar to that. There are obviously always going to be people who have natural propensity to learn this or that, and so they'll be able to pick things up a little bit more fluidly than other people might. But still, I think the depth of knowledge, and depending again, because not everybody wants to aim for mastery. Not everybody's trying to hang in the Met or compete with Velázquez. But for those that do want to do that, for those that really want to adopt themselves into the tradition and be, on the road to mastery, I think that training is totally necessary.
Well, let's talk about the road to mastery. I was at a dinner party at Fred Ross's house one evening, and there were a number of art historians, curators, artists, etc. And the discussion came up about mastery, what it takes to become a master. And one artist, whose name I don't recall at the moment, said, for someone of my age, at the time much younger, probably 10 years ago, he said, it's not possible for you. He said, it's only possible for somebody who's 15, 16, 18, 20, 25 years old, if they work hard at it, by the time your age, they'll hit mastery. And I'm not so sure I agree with that. Maybe it's because I don't want to agree with it. What do you think?
Well, I think there's different levels of mastery too, and I don't want to get caught up in trying to define exactly what mastery is or how individuals can achieve it. I think every individual has to be really concerned with, and again, it depends on their goals, because painting is just really fun for a lot of people, and they don't want the pressure of trying to be, really that brilliant, and that's okay. I think you have to be true to yourself and say, this is what I'm in it for. But for those people that are really just, they want to make it their whole life and achieve something great, I think it's important for them to say, although this is my goal, my reality is also this, and my mastery, I want to get as good as I can get. And so, it's an important part of the conversation to me, because it's a little bit more fairly individual. But I don't know. I mean, I think for sure the younger mind is more malleable. It soaks up information a lot faster. The difference to me would be that when someone at a younger age is able to absorb and digest the information, foundational information, really basic information, become a great draftsman in terms of like accuracy or all the fundamentals early on, the only difference would be is the amount of time they have to evolve into higher and higher thinking. So for me, like Dan Graves, Jacob Collins, I feel like these guys that started kind of bringing these academic principles back, they had to spend a lot of time trying to piece things back together. And fortunately for my generation, they did. But I feel like we probably, as a result of that, got it 10 times faster than they did, which allows us then that much more time to think about higher things. And then hopefully the people that I'm teaching, that opens up time for them to consider higher things. So I think it's really dependent on someone, the mental development of somebody, because I think that's where the mastery occurs, is when your mind gets to a point, like Bert Silverman, like we were talking about earlier, where it can consider things that need to be considered in order to create masterpieces. And I don't think that that's necessarily age specific, but I do think that it's development specific, and development does take time. So if somebody gets going a little bit later, they may just have to dive into it deeper. They may have to be more disciplined. They may have to spend more time with it to play a little bit of time catch up. But I don't think it's off limits for them.
For the person who doesn't know, help me understand what the process would be in your particular school. It's based on academic process, which many of the ateliers are doing. Can you give us the specifics in your school?
Yeah, we're kind of trying to fashion ourselves as much as possible after a 19th century curriculum, which I think a lot of the ateliers are probably doing. The three pillars of the 19th century were the copying from the antique, which in our case is we start with bark drawings.
A lot of people don't know what bark drawings are. Maybe you can articulate that for them.
Yeah, Charles Bargue was, I think he was actually a lithographer in the 19th century. He did a lot of the lithography for some of the most famous artists. And then the French government commissioned a drawing course that they would adopt and teach at the Beaux-Arts. So he, under the direction of Jean-Léon Gérôme, created an entire drawing course. It took him 10 years to develop, and then they adopted that. And so we're using that drawing course now, the plates from that course. And it's really, it's so brilliantly designed to help students understand really fundamental principles from the very beginning. And they learn how to see through going through the drawing course, and it's just a brilliantly designed progression for students. It's like they're learning the ABCs of seeing.
That's B-A-R-G.
B-A-R-G-U-E.
Right.
Yeah,
Barg.
Charles Barg.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful book. There's a volume, and it's probably an $80 or $100, $200 book. I don't know, but it's very worthwhile. What I do is that I scanned all of the Barg drawings and I put them in my iPad.
Yeah.
And then I can practice them when I'm on an airplane. I set up the iPad and I set up a sketching pad, and so that's how I get my drawing in. But it's valuable for anybody to start there.
Yeah, Jerry Ackerman, who recently died, unfortunately, he went and studied at the Florence Academy and drew these plates to know how better to write the book and kind of compile all of this. So it's a great resource that anybody should get. But we start with that. Our students go through 2 or 3 copies in pencil and then 2 or 3 in charcoal. And then they go to cast drawing, which is also under that pillar of copying from the antique. The second pillar is copying from nature, which is obviously figure, portraiture, still life, landscape painting, which we've got a figure in the studio each day that students study from. And then the third pillar of the 19th century was copying from the masters, and that's the one pillar that doesn't necessarily exist in a lot of the schools. Not that people aren't looking at the masters, but that as part of the weekly curriculum, doing master copies is not generally part of it. A lot of the reason for that, especially for us, is access to.
You don't have the Louvre in your backyard.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons I've been working towards moving the school to Paris, so that we have access to that and we can add that back to the curriculum. I think that's really important in terms of artistic development. Maybe the most important thing for me is, and because you can learn to see accurately with bar drawings, you can learn to, and cast drawings as well. It's just so, the exercises, the way that they're taught, there's so much information in those exercises. You can learn to see as well through drawing the figure in the portrait. You can start to understand elements of form and space and weight, character and rhythm. But there's no part of that curriculum that teaches you how to develop your personal vision, and no part of that curriculum that also teaches you why you're learning how to see so well. And how to apply those principles to something deeply artistic. And I think a lot of students adopt the idea that then the study is the art. And so a lot of students coming out of the ateliers at the moment are creating works that are portrait, still life oriented, but sort of without any deep artistic purpose. And I think that's where studying the masters is really evident, or the lack of studying the masters is really evident. And in the 19th century you had that as part of the core curriculum, and you had this really personal development of the individual artist, and there was a heritage that was theirs because of that one pillar. When they were developing the basic essential skills, they also had a really clear goal by spending all that time with great master works. They knew what art was, they knew why it was important, and they knew how then to create works that were relevant and had a certain power for a public. And for me, one of the ideas that I really want to pass on, not only to my students but conversationally with other artists, is that art is a service-oriented pursuit. That although it's personal and we make it for us because there's something in us that kind of drives us to do that, that what we're making is for other people. It's for the service of other people. And I think if people can consider that, the work that they make will become more meaningful, not only to themselves, but for a public. So much of the work being done, even in, just speaking of the representational world, because I think trying to put representation and total abstraction in the same room is not really relevant. But even within representation, there's so much ambiguity, and it just doesn't have. I mean, everybody's trying to be unique or try to cross over into the other realm for monetary reasons, for popularity reasons. And I think there's this really forced ambiguity to a lot of representational painting that does not connect with an audience, that still plays into that postmodern mentality of shock value or really deliberate obscurity that makes it seem deep, but is really just obscure. And
what makes it seem deep is perhaps a way of accomplishing what you just said. That of course in the world of modernism, there's an awful lot of people telling you, well, this is good, but not being able to say why it's good.
Right.
At least in my opinion. So that may. So I know of the artists that you're talking about, specifics, and trying to play to kind of crossing the line between the classical and being very relevant in today's world. What's wrong with that?
I think if it's sincere and deliberate, and you're trying to. You're working your way through trying to explain something, and you're just you're figuring it out, and it's really purposeful for the message of the art. Then it's relevant. I think there's a lot of people doing that, whose work I might see as obscure. But it's really purposeful, and when you get to talk to the artist, you get a sense of the depth of thought that goes into it. But a lot of it is just trying to pander to a market,
being commercial,
and I think there's a big difference between those two pursuits.
But isn't that? If I could challenge that for just a second, isn't that why a lot of people paint? Is that they paint because they want to paint what they love, but they also want their work to be embraced by a buying public.
Sure.
What's wrong with commercialism?
Nothing. If a lot of people really. It's priorities for the individual, and if somebody's priority is to make money and be financially stable, you can't fault that. I've got 5 kids, and I know what it's like to be financially stable and not financially stable. So, a lot of people are going to make certain decisions for commercial reasons, and it's fine. You don't want to fault people for their life situation or their decisions that they're making. I guess the fault I would find is in trying when it's artificial. when people are playing the more purist card and it's clearly commercial, that's probably what bothers me the most is, when people are honest about it, fine. But when you try to pretend to be something that you're not, I think you can see it in the work, and that's, again, to go back to this service-oriented pursuit. I just think when you make your work, or the greatest power, the work with the greatest power, to me, has always been the work that really considered its audience, and that's definitely something that I want to do.
Service orientation obviously has a lot to do with what your own life is about, where you live, what your audience is. If you live in, let's say, New York City or LA versus Utah or Miami, I mean, there's a lot of different cultural approaches one might take that is servicing that particular world. Now, you have an interesting, you said something about, you have 5 kids to feed.
Yeah.
You clearly could be more commercial than you are and probably make a lot more money than you do by crossing a certain line. What would that line be for you that you're not willing to cross?
In my experience, my perception is that being really commercially successful quickly can be done very easily by doing one thing, and you don't even have to do it well, you just have to do a lot of it and then market it well. And I've seen so many artists that have kind of followed that pattern. There's a couple of things that happen when you do that. One is, I think the buying audience thinks that that what you're doing is far more purposeful, and there's a deeper motivation behind the art because you're doing one thing, say painting bears, whatever. This guy must really care about bears, and then you start to play the card of being an environmentalist, or I don't know, you come out with bear playing cards or whatever. But you brand yourself by doing one thing. And again, it doesn't have to even be done well, it just has to be done a lot. And once people know about it, they want it. I think that's one thing that I've learned is people want what they've heard of. And it's easier to say, I'm the guy that makes red Levi's. And anytime anybody wants red Levi's, they know who to go to.
Well, and we find, in the magazine world, we see this every day. We see artists who are advertising a landscape, and then you get to their website and they have 500 other different things.
Yeah.
And we hear that the audiences are confused.
Yeah. And
so part of it, from my particular standpoint, I want to do a little bit of everything because I get bored easily.
Yeah.
I'm interested in landscape painting. I'm interested in still life. I'm interested in portraiture.
Yeah.
To some extent, if somebody focuses exclusively on one thing, they can get really good at it, really good at painting bears.
Or just really efficient.
Or really efficient, right.
Yeah. And that's really helpful.
So it's becoming a production.
Right.
What I think I hear you saying is that you don't necessarily think that one becoming a production house where you're just cranking out things of the same thing is valuable.
Well, I'm sort of like you. I'm interested in everything, and so I'm not saying that it's not valid.
It's not what you want to do.
Yeah, I feel like I'm coming across as really downplaying all these other people's decisions and being very judgmental about them. That's not it. It's just looking at the different options for myself. I see that as one of them, and I had an opportunity to do that at a certain point. I was doing a lot of small invented landscapes. I think you own one, yeah, everybody really loved them. They were very simple, kind of ethereal, soft, moody. They were. I got really fast at doing them, and the galleries were asking for them, collectors were asking for them, and it just it got to a point where I could have turned it into a whole thing.
A machine.
Yeah, and the machine never would have faltered. It would have just kept going, because as soon as you saturate the first 20 people, the next 40 people just heard about it. And there's so many people in the world that you think you're going to paint yourself out of market, and you won't. There's just so many people, and so, you know, I had that opportunity to do those invented landscapes and just keep going and going, and it really wasn't a decision for me, because I started to do those invented landscapes to prove what I knew about landscape. I just wanted to see how far I could push invention, and it was really exciting in the beginning. But after I'd done so many, I started to prove what I didn't know about landscape painting. It got very frustrating. And so at a certain point, it started to feel like I was making stuff. It was like I was trying to print money on canvas, and it didn't feel like I was pushing myself artistically anymore.
Didn't feel like you were being true to yourself.
Yeah, I wasn't learning. I was actually. It felt like a lie. It felt like, you know, I can paint this and I can make it pretty like you want it, but it looks exactly the same as the last 20 things I painted, and why would you want that? And I want to do something new. I want to learn something new, and that's actually, I had a break in my studies between 2003 and 2006, where I went in 2003 to Florence Academy, ran out of money, and had to come home for 3.5 years. And that's when that happened, and it was sort of, you know, I had an article in American Art Collector, and they specifically said, you know, Ryan Brown, a landscape painter, and that was part of what led me to think, like, I can't be this. I want to be a painter. I want to be an artist. I don't even know if I want to be a painter, because I'm interested in sculpture, and, you know, what if I want to make a coffee table at some point, and I want that to be valuable as well. So that's when I decided to go back to the Florence Academy. I knew I had to get better at doing the figure and kind of extend my range and abilities. And now I think, to go back, you know, to the original point, that's my decision. That's my priority. That probably takes me a little bit less commercial, is that I'm very, very interested in a lot of things, and I want to paint each of them with as a great of ability as possible. So I'm looking at the long run. I'm saying in 20 years, hopefully you'll be able to look back at the body of work and see a common thread. Whereas in the beginning, people are probably going to be confused. What does he do? And saying, well, he's just a painter is not enough. He's a wildlife artist. He's a landscape painter. He's a plein air painter. He's a portrait painter. You know, people want to sort of compartmentalize you and know what you're about. And I'm just about painting things that stir me. You know, things that I feel have to be painted.
Things that
need to be put on
awaken
canvas.
in your soul.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's just merely a choice, and it's admirable to be able to do that. There's an artist in your area by the name of John Coleman, who's a very famous Western artist, but he sculpts, he does landscapes, he does still lifes, he does a lot. He does what he wants to do. Now, they all tend to be Western in nature, probably because he lives in the West and he loves the West.
Yeah.
But at least he's doing what he wants. You know, George Carlson became a very wealthy, successful sculptor, and then one day it said, "I'm done with sculpting. I'm moving to painting." So I think it's a choice. I have friends who land on something that's very successful, and they say, you know what, this is what I want to do. I want to produce the same thing
Yeah.
over and over and over again for the rest of my life, and I'm happy doing that.
Yeah.
And I think every artist has to make their choice. It's not necessarily a bad or a good thing.
Yeah.
I do think there are lines that need to be drawn.
Yeah.
For instance, painting the same scene over and over again and selling it at an art show over and over again because it sells. But then again, that's more of a commercial venture.
Sure.
That's more along the lines of what some others would do manufacturing-wise. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah, I think for me, you have to say, what do I ultimately want to achieve? And this is for every artist. Really sit down and say, what do I ultimately want to achieve? And how can I get there? And for some, it's going to be financial prosperity first, so they feel like they can gain the freedom to do the things that may be more personal. And that's totally valid. So you have to, no matter what your decision is, you have to be very specific about your priorities.
Right.
And my priority, I've decided, is going to develop a higher and higher level of mastery in what I'm doing, so that I can more cleanly express what I want to express.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being best, do you see yourself as where would you see yourself as a painter? In terms of your interest, not in terms of your mastery, but in terms of your interest as a painter.
I want to hang in the Met someday.
Okay. Now, what about as a teacher? Because you're living in two worlds. You're a teacher and you're a painter. Where do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be which is more important to you?
I think teaching is for me, it's more conversational and friendship. I don't see myself as some sort of iconic teacher. I see myself, when students come in, I feel like I'm just sharing information with a friend.
Yeah, but you're very passionate about teaching. I've had conversations with you in the past, and you are driven to help these students find what you found.
Yeah, I think it's like, I feel like I was so fortunate to be able to get this information and develop, and it was such a life-changing, eye-opening experience to go from the blindness we were talking about earlier at the university, where I didn't know, total naivete, to somebody just taking you by the hand and showing you something, and then opening the door for you to really do something personal and something that you never could have done before without that. And so that's kind of the motivation for me is it's like handing out free candy. It's just really simple. This information is very accessible, and it will change your life.
It's not easy. It's free and accessible, but it's not easy.
Well, yeah, you have to develop a pretty good discipline and work ethic. You really have to fight for it, but it's accessible. That's what I mean by easy is it's accessible, and so I feel like teaching is really not an option. It's like I was given the information, and it's not mine, and so it's only valuable if I give it away, so it's not it's not even an option for me.
Well, you're in some interesting lineage. If you trace back the lineage of the Florence Academy. So you go to Florence Academy, which is Daniel Graves, who studied under Signorita Simi, who studied under her father, Federico, who studied under Jerome, I believe. There may have been one step in between.
Yeah, I think Dan also worked some with Richard Lack.
He did.
And there's a nice lineage that way, too.
Yes, there is. And there may have been somebody else in the middle of all that, too. Maybe Frank Riley. I'm trying to remember, but it's interesting because those techniques were passed down. I studied under a man who studied with Simi as well, and was able to take what he learned from her. I never mastered it, but so you're very fortunate to be able to have that and then to be able to pass it forward, because it was almost lost.
Yeah.
I mean, if it were not for a couple of brave souls, quite frankly, who kept it alive in the face of modernism when they were complete outcasts,
Yeah.
doing things that nobody wanted.
Yeah.
And even Bert Silverman told me he was at a time he's doing things when nobody wanted. The students today need to understand that they're living in a very special time, because when I started Fine Art Connoisseur magazine, which has been, I don't know, at least a decade or more ago, there were basically 3 or 4 ateliers.
Yeah.
There was nothing. And it has changed so dramatically. And then there were a couple of, maybe 100 people who were studying in total. Today there are probably a few thousand who are studying in total, because the second and third generation of these people have popped up with ateliers all around the world. So they're very fortunate, and this is a special time, and probably moving into a time when this kind of work will get higher appreciation. My sense is that guys like yourself, who are at this kind of cusp of the next generation, the Daniel Graves and the Jacob Collins are going to be the old guys one day, and then you're going to shift in and be the top guys. And by the time that happens, we may see the works that you're doing being highly revered, as much as we're seeing the highly revered modern works today selling for massive prices, because there's a shift in the thinking about art. The younger people are really not interested in what their parents' generation was interested in it, and their grandparents' generation and their great-grandparents' generation, which was essentially a modernism movement, which may be fading, and a representational movement may be moving forward.
Yeah.
Or then again, it may be wishful thinking.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a strong enough market. Obviously, there is a pretty drastic difference between the amount of money in the postmodern, whatever you want to call it, abstract world, and the representational world. But the representational world is very strong. It's growing, and there's a lot of financial power behind it, enough for everybody that's great, and so whether we sell for 25,000, 250,000, or 25 million, I think it's not. I don't even care. If I can do what I want to do with my life, and I have kind of enough finances to do that, and raise my kids in a good way and in a good home, I don't need to sell for $25 million. I'm not really concerned about that.
Well, there's a danger that goes with that, and that is
Sure.
that it could become much like the postmodernism world, where you look at some of these well-known popular artists today, which are basically factories.
Yeah.
And
Right.
The guy comes up with a concept and says, "Here, go make this,"
Right.
and then it sells for $200 million. And it changes the nature of things. And so
Yeah.
we have to be very careful what we wish for, because if the demand is high and we start cranking things out and losing the sensitivities that go with it, that's where we stand to lose.
Yeah.
We may win financially.
There's a lot of artists in history that had a lot of financial success in their time. Everybody, the running joke that we all hear is, you'll be famous when you die, or you'll make a lot of money when you die. Not necessarily true. Most artists are far better known in their lifetime.
Well, that's all because of the whole Van Gogh thing, because he became
Right.
so popular. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Messonnier and Bouguereau, they were very well off in their time, and I think what it does is it really frees you up to spend more time on each project, potentially, and so financial stability for me just means a little bit more freedom to explore more deeply what I'm doing. The reason I think, and maybe this will make the video, maybe it won't, because maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not, but the reason I think it won't ever really shift is purely financial. I think that when you're talking about representational painting, it comes with a certain set of pretty distinguishable standards. And when you're talking about what dirty diapers in a corner, or you know, a blank canvas with like a really lame joke typed on it, or any sort of art like that, there's nothing by which you can judge it. And for investors, people like the Gagosians, or people with lots and lots of money who are putting hundreds of millions of dollars into this stuff, you have a market that has no oversight. If you're a real estate investor, then the architect, location, materials used to build it, square footage, all of these things play into its value. And although those things can fluctuate, there is a standard by which they're judged. And art has, there's no oversight. If you own a company and you go public and you falsify information, then you could go to prison. You can't falsify art. You can't say you can say this is worth $35 million, and people will just believe it, and then it's worth $35 million. And so for that reason alone, when you're talking about the amount of money that is in that type of work, I don't think you're ever going to change it, because representational work can be judged.
Well, and I'm not so sure that the people who control that world want that to be changed, because if it changes, then they can't manufacture, you know, the next great thing.
Right.
Tell people
they're in complete control of the market, and they're making mountains and mountains of money off of the fact that it's an investment that has no oversight, and you can't lie about it, you know. So
well,
you can invent anything, and you're inventing wealth, basically, and I don't know that you can do that with representational painting, because you can say that's drawn poorly, you can say, I mean, whatever you want. There's something recognizable.
It's measurable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's the same with music. You know, and even though there is jazz, which is improvised,
Yeah.
It's based on a scale, right? It's based on a system. If someone just got out there and started blowing notes, and not notes, just making noises,
Right.
you know, that would almost be the equivalent of what we're seeing in the abstract postmodernism,
Yeah.
et cetera. And so basically what we're doing, or what you're doing, is you're teaching foundational principles. Where they go on top of that
Yeah.
is up to the individual.
Yeah. Yeah, we want to give them the tools and then let them follow their path.
So today you're still a relatively young man. You have a young family. You have 5 children. What are their names?
Chloe, Brody, Abby, Charlotte, and Aiden.
So that's
4 girls.
4 girls.
1 boy.
1 boy. What's the age range?
13 to 3.
Wow.
Yeah. And
A lot of pressure.
I guess. I don't know anything different. Yeah, I guess. It seems normal to me. They're really good models. So I'm getting into painting my kids a lot more, which is dangerous, because I never want to sell them. So I've got to. My life is all about a very delicate balance. I run the school. I teach every day. I have to manage the whole thing and try and run that whole side of the business. I have to paint on my own. I have to figure out which projects I'm working on. I got to coach my son's basketball team. I mean, there's a lot going on, and especially in terms of choosing projects, there's a lot of things. I've never been more passionate about every single project I'm working on. I have maybe 20 paintings I'm working on, and I love them completely. I think each one is like the best thing I've ever done or designed, and so it's sometimes hard to choose. Half of those are things I'll never sell, and half of them are things I will sell. So trying to balance that out can be somewhat difficult.
Yeah, but that's important. If you go to the Soroya Museum or the Soroya House,
Yeah.
and you see all his personal paintings of his family and how wonderfully executed they are, they're almost more beautiful than anything else
Yeah.
he's done, because you can tell his heart is really in it. And you can see the progression of his kids from, you know, lying in bed with mom as a
Right.
baby to as an adult. That's pretty cool to see. It's nice that they kept that collection together.
Yeah, yeah. For me, the more personal the subject, the more compelled I feel to follow it. You know, I've kind of moved from things that I want to paint because they're beautiful, and I have those paintings. You know, the main motivation is I find it beautiful. To things I find beautiful and are deeply personal. You know, I did, you know, just did the figure in the landscape, and it's something that kind of started, I talked about in the video, it started with seeing my daughter in the woods. We were camping, and, you know, she pooped her pants, and we had to change her, and we're seeing there, you know, standing there naked in the woods, and seeing the flesh against the green and whatever. That was my initial thought. I need to start painting the figure in the landscape, because that connection between the flesh tones and the greenery is amazing. And now I'm working on a large painting of all four of my daughters in the woods, and the excitement I have for painting these models in the woods is deep. I mean, it's so beautiful, the color harmonies you can get, and this natural quality when you're putting all of the brilliance of painting a figure into the landscape. There's a really beautiful connection. But working on the one of my daughters is like the most meaningful painting I've ever made, and it's just a deeper motivation. There's something really deeply, that I'm deeply connected to the subject matter, and it's not just about making a really beautiful painting. It's personal, and so I've kind of moved in that direction. But that's a hard direction to move in, because I don't ever want to sell that stuff, and you know, I'm so many of the things I'm working on is that, and so it's really financially just a bad idea to be spending so much time on that stuff. I can't help it.
If the clock stopped ticking and today was your last day, what would you want to be remembered for?
I want my kids to remember that I was funny, that I was a fun guy, that I really, really loved my family. If they knew that, I think, you know, that's good. You know, if they had those memories, I think that's probably the most important thing.
That's a great answer.
Good. Yeah, painting's just painting. It's just, you know, if I make something great and people like it, that's great, but that's it's kind of to the side of everything else. So.
Well, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, that was Ryan Brown and the video Painting Classical Portraits. You can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com, and in the comments section, be sure to look for that special discount code. Thank you for watching today. Hope you got a lot out of it. I'm Eric Rhodes.
With all of the abstraction we see in the modern art world, it can sometimes seem like representational painting is a lost art. In fact, just a few years ago, it was almost impossible to find a place to learn how to do the classics. One artist wasn't satisfied with his art education. He had the feeling there was more to portraiture than what was being taught in art schools around the country. So he headed for Florence to learn from masters, old and new. Then, after he studied and developed a lot of experience to become a master himself, he started his own school. And now, he's brought that knowledge back to you in his brand new course, Painting Classic Portraits with Ryan S. Brown. But don't be fooled. This isn't just another instructional painting video. It's a full 5-day workshop on video. And it's the first and only time we've filmed an entire live workshop. In fact, a live audience of about 15 people paid over $600 each to attend this workshop. We film several hours each day, and after editing, this extensive video covers 14 hours of instruction on 4 discs. Inside this workshop on film, you'll learn the important foundational techniques of portraiture, which allow you to paint a beautiful portrait step by step in a clear and easy way. But not just any portrait, a portrait using the techniques of the old masters, where you end up with a highly finished, museum-quality painting. You'll learn Ryan's unique way to prepare one of the most paintable canvas surfaces you've ever learned, plus how to pose and draw your model, create precise and balanced compositions. Ryan also reveals his newly rediscovered technique for mixing fleshy tones from previously lost pigments, a lost art that Italian masters used centuries ago. And perhaps most importantly, he'll teach you how to prepare your concept for your portrait, an essential but often overlooked part of creating beautiful paintings.
But there's a big difference in my approach to making a study from a model and making a painting from a model. I'm not trying to make a head study. I'm trying to make a painting. I want to make as beautifully designed a painting as I can. And so that's where all of the preliminary thought and design comes into it. So as I'm looking at her, I'm thinking painting, not study. And there's a big difference for me.
This workshop on film is for the artist who craves to study under a master, but can't take the time or make the trip to Europe. It's for the artist who wants to do impressive, highly finished museum-quality paintings. And you don't have to spend the $600 like others had to pay to attend, plus their travel, lodging, and meals. You can take this workshop in your home, on your own time, painting along until you too have mastered the art of classic Renaissance-style painting with contemporary sensibilities. Painting Classic Portraits with Ryan S. Brown is available on DVD and downloadable video.